My name is Steve Bain. I'm a professor of medicine based in Swansea in the UK. I'd like to present data from the SUSTAIN-6 study, and this is a post hoc analysis looking at the effect of semaglutide on MACE, that's major adverse cardiovascular events, blood pressure and lipids. And this is an analysis by race and ethnicity. Now, SUSTAIN-6 was the cardiovascular outcome trial for semaglutide given as a subcutaneous once-weekly injection. And this was in 2 doses of 0.5 milligrams and 1 milligram compared with volume-matched placebo, with the analysis being a pooled analysis at the end of the study. And the study was an event-driven but also a time-driven study to look at the cardiovascular safety of subcutaneous semaglutide. Now, in this analysis, what we've done is to do a post hoc subgroup analysis looking at ethnicity and also race. In terms of race, the population in the SUSTAIN-6 was divided into Caucasian, Black, African American and Asian, and then with a final small group of others. And in terms of the ethnicity, this was in terms of Hispanic and non-Hispanic individuals. If you look at the baseline characteristics of the subjects according to these different categories, then they were pretty similar. So similar in terms of baseline HbA1c, baseline age and baseline duration of diabetes. There's a slight reduction or smaller weight in those from an Asian background, but overall I would say that the groups were fairly well matched when divided in this way. If we look at the primary endpoint, so this is the time to first major adverse cardiovascular events, so-called 3-point MACE because it included cardiovascular death, non-fatal MI and non-fatal stroke. Then if you see these forest plots here, the forest plots, there's a dotted line which equates to a 1.0, meaning that semaglutide versus placebo were much the same, and you can see that the point estimates generally move towards the left, favouring semaglutide. And indeed there's no evidence of heterogeneity according to either race or ethnicity, and this has been assessed using a interaction p-value, which you can see at the end of this table A is non-significant in all cases. If we look at the individual components of the 3-point MACE, so non-fatal stroke, non-fatal MI and time to cardiovascular death, you can see that generally the point estimates are going to the left and so favouring semaglutide over placebo. In table C, you can see that in the Black and African cohort, there's a suggestion of movement to the right, but the confidence intervals are very wide, crossing unity, and therefore this is a non-significant change. Once again, the interaction values that are shown in the p-values on the right-hand side of this table suggest that there's no heterogeneity according to either race or ethnic or ethnicity. If we now turn to the changes in blood pressure, this is figure 2. The top table is giving systolic blood pressure, the bottom table giving diastolic blood pressure. In this table there was actually some heterogeneity recorded, and that was due to a slight increase in blood pressure in the Black and African American group. However, this A was small and B only applied to the 0.5 milligram semaglutide patients, whereas the 1 milligram semaglutide patients actually showed a decrease in systolic blood pressure. So it's very difficult to attribute this to a true clinically relevant event, and probably the heterogeneity was largely accounted for by the other subgroup, where you can see there was a large fall in blood pressure, although this only amounted to a small number of patients. If we look at diastolic blood pressure, once again small falls and no evidence of heterogeneity. If we turn to the lipid elements that were assessed, LDL cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, free fatty acids and triglycerides, essentially there were small movements that were generally in a favourable direction, but no evidence of any clinical heterogeneity between the various groups. Finally, if we turn to adverse events, again slight changes, so there was tended to be less nausea and vomiting in those patients from an Asian background, but really I think there was no new adverse events that were turning up and no evidence that there was any significant difference between the ethnicity and the racial groups. So I think in conclusion, what I would suggest is that this post hoc analysis is showing that semaglutide is effective and efficacious across all racial groups that were assessed and across the ethnicities that were assessed. And this is sort of reassuring in terms of clinical use. It also fits together quite nicely with a previous analysis looking at other SUSTAIN studies, so SUSTAIN 1 to 5, where post hoc analyses looking at the populations according to ethnicity and race didn't show any evidence of significant clinical differences. So I'd like to thank all of the patients and subjects who took part in the SUSTAIN 6 study, and for my colleagues, both those on the authorship list and indeed those throughout the world who contributed to the SUSTAIN 6 analysis. Thank you.